Okay, so welcome, Kate, and over to you.
All right, and thank you for having me, Kashmir. And it's nice to meet all of you from all over the place. It sounds like, and I'm really looking forward to having a little bit of a chat with you for about an hour about gamification, games, and online learning, and all that good stuff. I'll introduce myself a little more fully lately in a couple of slides, but really, what I want to do is actually find out a little bit more about you. So let's keep it interesting. Who's a gamer amongst there? So when I say this, I want you to put some answers in the chat window for me. So just type in the kinds of games that you're playing at the moment. And if you don't play games at all, put that in the window, because Mass Effect, that's a proper gamer. Hardcore RPG. I like it. All right, Michael, tell us what your kids are playing. The Legendary Edition. There is a mod for that one, Matthew, that makes the ending slightly happier, I've heard. All right, so Laura, you're a teacher. You said you are teaching at UTAS as well. Dead by Daylight, Grand Theft Auto, yes. All right, some of the classic ones. Great, nice. All right. Wordle. I mean, how interesting is Wordle? It's kind of taken the world by storm, hasn't it? And I saw, I muck around a little bit with some programming and coding, and GitHub which is an online code repository, if you don't know what it is suddenly full of all of these people who've written automated programs that are guaranteed to solve the Wordle problem of the day for you. Okay, board games, I like it. Cluedo is a classic. English and language games all the time. This is interesting. Fallout 4, Knights of the Old Republic. Yes, okay. So we've got a good mix. This is really cool. All right, so this is going to be quite interesting. So why do you play games? So put that answer in the chat window. And I know that's a massive question. Or why do your children play games? Or why do you use games in your classroom? Let's see what you come up. Keeps people on. All right, Laura, you're going to have to turn on your microphone and explain that one a little bit more. What do you mean keeps people on their toes?
I think games and quizzes and anything that challenges is something which stimulates the mind and stimulates the desire. I think there's good competition, that natural competitive vein that we have, that I think is innate. Is stimulated by any form of gamification.
Nice. I remember I used to run. I used to work for UNSW, and I did some work with the Gifted Education Resource Research and Information Centre, and we used to run these camps for these very, very bright children, which was lots and lots of fun. But we tried to avoid being competitive. Except one year we did this incredible treasure hunt all around the grounds of this school that was hosting us. And we asked the students what they thought about it. And the thing they said is they really liked the competitive aspect. And we're like, oh, okay, we might not like it making it too competitive, but that certainly appears to be innate kind of thing. Yeah, nice. Shake says it's interactive and fun. Offers teachers immediate feedback on where students are at. All right, so we're picking up some ideas. We've got this idea of challenge. We've got this idea of fun. We've got this idea of interactivity. We've got this idea of immediate feedback, which is interesting. We'll come back to that. And Lydia, so why board games? I mean, Lydia, if you work in special education needs, that kind of area, I imagine there are lots and lots of kinds of resources out there, but you've made a constant decision. You've made a conscious decision. You can tell I'm a little bit out of practice. The first session of the year, you've made a conscious decision to use board games. So I think there must be some kind of pedagogical principle that you're employing there. Yeah. Use games in the training room because it is hidden learning. Yeah, because it's fun, right? People don't necessarily associate it with learning. All right, this is cool. All right. We can make this really problematic, and I will in a moment, by saying, is that gamification or is that just games? And then we can say, well, what's the difference? But we'll get to all of that. Before we do that, I think I should introduce myself. This is me. I am a lecturer in learning design at the University of Technology, Sydney, which is in Ultimo. And my PhD is still reasonably shiny. I got it in 2018. And before that, I was a high school teacher and leader, both in Australia and the UK. I think I like to say I've got the full sets. I've worked in public, in independent, in Catholic sectors, in primary and secondary, and post-secondary settings. I've kind of been a bit of a wanderer through all the different kind of educational settings. And it's true, I am a terrible ukulele player. That is not just, I've got it there and, I'm constantly trying to teach myself. Music education is full of gamification as well. But yeah, that's a whole nother point of view. All right, so let's really get into what we're talking about. And let's talk about what is gamification. And I'd like to start off by giving you a really quick example. So in the chat window, if you've heard of Duolingo, give me a yes, a Y or an N. Yeah, all right, there's my people. Matthew, no, really? Okay, that's interesting. All right, if you use Duolingo, give me another yes. Okay, some people have used it in the past. That's interesting, Michael. We might come back to that because I want to know what previously. Okay, Adina, taught yourself Spanish. Fantastic. Okay, so Duolingo, is a great starting point to talk about gamification simply because I think it is an interesting case study. Now, when I start talking about this, I always need to say, are there any English as an additional language teachers or English language teachers in the classroom, or second, teaching English as a foreign language people in the classroom, because they have often very strong opinions about whether Duolingo is effective or not. And I certainly don't, because I'm not English as a foreign language teacher. And I would bow down to your expertise. We're not looking at it as whether it's an effective for that kind of thing. We're looking at it as an example of gamification. But I'm interested to hear what you thought about it. All right, so it was launched to the public in 2012. It was launched by a guy called Louis van Aan, who has become a bit of an edu celebrity at the moment. There are more than 300 million active users, which I think is staggering. That's probably what Australia plus Indonesia put together of people constantly learning. So whatever else, it is big. And you can see I talk about whether is it really effective? Well, maybe not. But we're interested in how it uses gamification. All right, let's have a look at a really quick video. We'll talk to Lewis. This is Lewis talking about whether it works.
Start by saying, this is
That's
what I
not
care
Lewis, that's Bill
about. This is
Clinton.
what I want to do. And why.
All right, here we go.
My name is Luis Fonan. I am the CEO and co-founder of Duolingo. About 5 years ago, I wanted to work on something that was related to education. A lot of people talk about education as something that brings equality to different social classes, but I always saw it as the opposite, something that brings inequality. Because what happens is that people who have a lot of money can buy themselves the best education in the world, whereas people who don't have very much money barely learn how to read and write, particularly in developing countries. So what we wanted to do was something that would give equal access to education to everybody. If you learn English in a non-English speaking country, your job prospects increase by a lot. You can make between 25 and 100% higher salary by just knowing English. We launched it 5 years ago, and now Duolingo is the most popular way to learn languages in the world. There are more people learning languages on Duolingo in the US than there are people learning languages in the whole US public school system. Duolingo is used by famous Hollywood actors or the richest man in the world and people going to public schools in developing countries. I think that communicating is the basis for society. Being able to communicate, I think, can bring world peace. Hopefully, we're going to have a world where everybody can speak each other's languages. That would be amazing.
I love it. All right. EduTech is just, sometimes it's on drugs. Okay. We've invented an app that teaches people maybe how to speak another language, and it's going to cause world peace. You see this often coming up in discussions about educational technology. There's this kind of overwhelming conviction that they've got the solution and it's going to fix everything. And as you might have guessed, I'm quite skeptical about that. I do think educational technology is incredibly powerful. It does not replace or substitute for poor pedagogy. But we'll get to all of that later, and we'll talk about how that fits into what we're going to talk about later. All right, so let's have a quick look at Duolingo. Oh, no, that's not Duolingo. Let's go to Duolingo. You can never type when people are looking at you. All right, so you can see this is me, and if you haven't seen it before, I'm gonna point out a few features, and then we're going to talk about what else you've noticed, and we're going to talk about what features we might consider to make it seem like a game, and whether that makes it gamification or not. So you can see straight away that there's my little avatar there, and I'm in a league and I'm competing against people. And if I complete a lesson, I'll be on a leaderboard. There's a little tracker showing how I'm going over the course of this week. You can see I haven't done very much the last couple of days. Hey, I'm on holidays, right? Then there's all my friends and how we're all going compared with each other. And I can share it on social media. So they're trying to make it a social experience. And then if I go into this, let's just do one little quick session here. Write this in Spanish, okay? I think that's El Pan. There you go. Immediate feedback. Nicely done.
Juan come pan.
Oh, it talks to me. I'm going to get this one wrong. We'll see what it says. Oh, wrong. Try
Yo
again.
soy un niño.
Little tracking bar here showing where I'm up to. It's quite attractive. There's lots of white space, those kinds of things. So I had a quick look through it. And these are the kinds of things that I noticed, okay? The first thing is there's a very clear structured pathway through Duolingo. In other words, there's a logical progression of what to do next. And there's clear visual representations of what I've successfully succeeded or not. So I've ticked those boxes. There's leaderboards. I mentioned those leaderboards, and that's a picture from when I was putting together my presentation showing where I am sitting in comparison to a random selection of those 200 million people around the world, 300 million people, whatever it was, okay? Which seems a bit bizarre, but maybe it motivates people, right? There's lots and lots of positive reinforcement. So straight away, I fill in the blanks, and you can see I got this one right. Immediately it says, excellent, well done. And what I've noticed is that they are getting even more over the top in their positive reinforcement. So if I get 5 in a row, a nice little animation appears and says, way to go, Keith, because it knows my name. And we know people respond to their names. And if I get 10 in a row, another nice little animation appears. What else did you notice in that very quick, or from your own experience? A lot of you have tried it out before. What else did you notice that seems to be gamified about it? And if you want to have a chat about it, switch on your microphone and tell me. Okay, you can purchase outfits. Yeah. So that's actually a really good point, Adina. So as you go through Duolingo, you earn, I think they're called lingots or something like that, which is kind of like anyway. And you can customize the Duo avatar. I think you can have them in a tracksuit and a tuxedo, kinds of things. Lindy, you mentioned cartoon images. Why do you think Duolingo, and this is a really interesting choice. This is a design choice that the designers have made. They've chosen to go with cartoonish images. Why?
Keith, is it because that is culturally agnostic?
Yes, I think that's probably it. And in fact, the main mascot, the owl called Duo, they never actually say, male, female, non-binary, anything like that. It's just Duo, okay? They never put it in a position where you have to say he or she or anything like that. And the other avatars they've got, the other cartoon images, it's very consciously diverse. And with the idea of being inclusive. So you have old people, you have young people, you have people from, different cultures and different dresses, all those kinds of things. Appealing, playful environment. Yeah. Childlike and therefore easy. Yeah. I think these are all really good points. Points is another one. Rewards is another one. Good. There's one thing that really drives people nuts about Duolingo, and that is if you don't do it for a couple of days, you start getting pop-ups on your phone, or you get emails if you've given them your email address saying, hey, don't forget about Duolingo. And lots of people are like, oh no, that's not cool. I don't need to be reminded to do that. But they do it because it's effective. It gets people back into the system. All right, so a couple of people said they didn't like it. And I'm just jumping back. It was Laura. Laura, why don't you like Duolingo? And tell us, is that a teaching thing that you don't like, or you just don't like the look of it, the feel of it?
No. I like the look. I like the feel. I think it's very clever. I think it's gamification, all the rest of that. I don't like it from a teacher's perspective, as I don't think it's effective. I wear two hats. I have been an EAL teacher for 25 years, and I am an online e-learning environment teacher, so for UTAS. So from a English language teacher's perspective, I find it to be I just don't find it effective, and I find it to be the word, I can't think of the word right now, but it's language is alive. Language needs to be in context. Language needs a lot more than an anagram. No, I just don't like it. So I'm on holidays. I haven't been working since the 10th of December. So my brain, I can't put words together this morning. They're all glued together. Sorry.
No, but you've raised a really important point in terms of what we're going to talk about in just a little bit, in terms of the value of gamification, which is something might look wonderful, something might be fun to play, but ultimately the difference between a game and gamification is that gamification is intending to teach or to help someone to learn, is to provide an environment that encourages learning. And if we're not doing that, all we've done is really create a game, which there's nothing wrong with that. But if we're being, if we're there to teach,
Sorry,
that's got to be.
Yep. Sorry, I just want to add, and I'll give you a different example. I have seen far too many teachers say, oh, I must put gamification in my teaching, therefore I will create a Kahoot quiz. And they throw in a random Kahoot quiz that has absolutely nothing to do. There's no teaching, no pedagogy, no nothing behind it, but the kids had fun. That's just, and Duolingo is just, it's not in context, and language needs to be in context. It needs to be real, like learning bread is pun or pane or whatever, just doesn't work for me.
Okay, great. All right, so, does anyone else want to add anything to that? Microphone on or off? No? All right, cool. Let's carry on. So let's talk about what makes a game. So this is the theoretical part of this little session, and then I'm going to dive into some examples, and then I'm going to give you some tools that you can play around with if you're interested in doing this. And I've just seen Adina is agreeing with Laura that language needs to be placed within the context, which is the whole idea behind immersive language learning, isn't it? All right, so couple of people that have written about what makes a game, and you might think, well, that's really obvious. A game is something like Scrabble or Mass Effect or Call of Duty or Fortnite. It's something you play, right? But I think in terms of education, any discussion of gamification needs to start off by talking about games, because and this is a point of some contention amongst the scholars of gamification. What's the difference between gamification and games-based learning? They often use the term hard games, so games that do have an intended educational outcome, even though that might not be their overall purpose, but they do have some element of education involved. And they say, some people argue, well, that's an example of gamification. Other people say, no, that's not exactly gamification. There's a difference between hard games and gamification. But I'll explain a little bit about those kinds of things as we go through. So a game is a system in which players engage in artificial conflict defined by rules that result in a quantifiable outcome. Now, that definition always kind of provokes a really strong response because most people, and I can see people are probably thinking about it at the moment. Hello, Fiona, you just came in. We're just having a chat about gamification. So, well, hang on, what about this new generation of cooperative games? Where people play together. So I quite like board games. There's lots of board games which are quite cooperative now, so your players work together. It doesn't mean that they're not in conflict with something else. Okay, so it's not necessarily between the players. It might be the players versus the computer, or the players versus, the big bad in the board game, So that conflict level still is there. There needs to be winners and losers for it to be a game. There's got to be rules, okay? You can't invent the rules as you go along. And one of the ways that I think about this is I think about sport, right? In your game of Aussie rules or rugby league or netball or whatever, there are rules that you've got to follow, and there's people who have a role to enforce those rules. And then it results in a quantifiable outcome. Usually a win for someone and a loss for someone else, or a draw or a tie. But it's generally not a result where people go, well, what just happened? I don't know. We don't know who won or lost. The second definition by Costa is probably a little more complex because it introduces this notion of abstraction, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Defined by rules, interactivity, and feedback. You already spoke about feedback, didn't we, in Duolingo as an example, that results in a quantifiable outcome. There it is again, often eliciting an emotional reaction. And that's why I like this definition. We play games because we care. We enjoy the sensation. It's the roller coaster psychology, okay? We get on roller coasters, not all of us, some of us don't enjoy it at all, and that's fine. But we get on roller coasters because we enjoy the sensation of being a little bit frightened, not too frightened, but a little bit frightened. We watch horror movies for the same reason, okay? That emotional reaction is it's drugs for our brains. It works, right? So what are the features of games? The most important thing is that games are a conglomeration of all of these different kinds of features. And I've taken this mostly from the work of Kyle Kapp, who has written a great deal. If you're really interested in this, start with Kapp's work, okay? Because he is fantastic. He puts together lots and lots of good stuff about what makes games and gamification. And I just want to point out a couple of those things there. So we've talked about the emotional reaction, the feedback, the quantifiable outcome. Interactivity is a really interesting one. In the rise of mobile gaming, so games you play on your phone or your iPad or whatever, there's more and more games that are kind of like passive games, where you do less and less, which I think is just bizarre. There's less interaction. There's got to be a challenge, otherwise it's not a game. We don't enjoy it as much. But the one that I want to point out is this level of abstraction. Games take things that are complex and they make them simpler, so that we can play them in 30 minutes or 40 minutes or even 100 hours if we're playing like this giant computer game. But it's still much, much simpler. So let me give you a really simple example of that. So at the moment, I'm playing a game called Assassin's Creed Odyssey on the PlayStation, which, you're a hero and you're running around killing things in ancient Greece. I'm an ex-history teacher. I really like it. It's set in the Peloponnesian Wars. It's fantastic, right? But it's not particularly realistic. It's abstracted, okay? And one of the most obvious examples of this abstraction is the idea that you can get to any part of ancient Greece in about 10 minutes, okay? Nothing is more than 3,000 meters away from anywhere else. Now, of course, that's not the case, but the game designers chose to do that. They chose to abstract the game, the distances between places, in order to make it easily accessible and understandable. And that's what happens in simulation games. So simulation games have been used in businesses for years to teach people how to respond to particular things. They've been used in military training for years. Tactical exercises without troops is what the Australian Defence Force calls it, or choots. And those are basically tabletop board games. And people play them. But of course, it takes away all of the other kinds of complexities and abstracts something that people can still learn from and still play, but not have to deal with all of it all at once. So what makes learning gamified? So how do we move from games to gamified learning? Well, the first thing is, and the most important thing, and I saw Michael put question 0, what are we trying to achieve? What are our learning objectives? There it is, promote learning. If you're not doing that, then you're not doing gamified learning. You've made a game. And whether it's a good game or not is entirely beside the point. Solve problems. There's always an element of problem solving. The other thing is that it's got to motivate action, okay? And this is what Duolingo tries to do with those reminder notifications. Oh, you haven't done your Duolingo today. Don't forget about this. And one of the really effective mechanisms it does is it has this streak counter. And I've noticed Apple has started using this. So if you read books on the Apple books, it tracks how many days in a row you've read your book. And it says, oh, don't forget, you've got a 300-day streak here. It'd be a shame. So what it's trying to do is promote people going back to it. Now, of course, there are some ethical considerations about that. And it's not surprising that many of the mobile games have very close relationships with the poker machine companies like Aristocrat, one of them, because what they're trying to do is encourage that kind of conditioned response. Every day I have to do this. Every day I have to do that, which, is an effective mechanism to encourage problem gambling. It also might be an effective mechanism to encourage learning. I think we shouldn't ignore these kinds of difficult questions about ethical kind of considerations in games and gamified learning. Okay. So the other thing that I think is worth talking about are the aesthetics of it. It's not true that every single game has got to look good. You might think back to Pong, one of the very first computer games, or even Pac-Man. We all know Pac-Man, right? Very simple looking game. But now there's more and more requirements for visually pleasing games. In terms of user experience design, which is gradually becoming closer and closer to learner experience design and learning design as a whole, we talk about the need to create responses that delight the learner. So it's not just about encouraging them to learn something, although that is, as Michael said, question zero, what are we trying to achieve? We also need to give them an emotional response. And the best emotional response is delight. I really enjoyed that. I got a kick out of that. Oh, that surprised me in a wonderful way, because we know that's the kind of thing that will encourage people to not just learn that better, but to return and learn more. But that is really, really hard to do. It's hard to do once, but if you're going to try to do it over and over and over again, that's really hard to do, because the human brain gets accustomed to repetition really, really quickly. Okay, so these are some of the ideas that CAP talks about in terms of making learning gamified. And then I thought I should give you some examples, all right? So these are just some fun examples of gamification. And some of them are quite old. But yeah, they're only short little videos. So this one is very famous from the Olympics.
I'm always doing this. I rush off to the underground to catch a train. And then when I actually get here, I realise I've left my wallet behind and I haven't got any money to pay for my journey. Well, from today, that's no longer a problem in Moscow, because now there's another way to get your ticket. And this is how you do it. I agree, it's a little unorthodox, but I think I'll get there in the end if I've got the puff. Now, as you can see, I'm trying to do squats in this rather unusual Russian vending machine. And I'm told that if I can do 30 squats in 2 minutes, then this machine will actually reward me with a free metro ticket that's worth 30 rubles. Now, this invention is the brainchild of the Russian Olympic Committee. And the whole idea is to encourage a sporty lifestyle for Russians ahead of the Sochi Games. Now, if you think you can fool this invention, think again, because there are special sensors here. And if it doesn't like any of my squats, perish the thought, of course, then it won't count them. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. Oh, there we go. I've done it. I'm going to get my ticket. Here it comes. Oh, the ticket. Thank you very much. Mind you, was it worth it? Because I really haven't got the energy now to get on that train.
People with ADHD.
All right, that's a bit of fun, right? Do you think that's an effective mechanism to teach people to make healthier decisions about their lives? Which is a form of learning, right? It's not school learning, but it would be a form of learning. Actually, let me make that question easier. What's the problem with that as an example of gamification? Shake, yeah, one-time learning. You only do it once, probably. It's reward-based. Is that a problem, Kashmir? I'm not sure. We all like rewards, don't we?
Yeah, but when you don't get the reward, you don't tend to do it. And so it is not necessarily putting you into kind of like a regular habit. So if I do squats to get the ticket, but if I am not getting anything, I won't do squats. So
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, he did it once, right? I want to know if I'm a Moscow commuter who catches the subway 5 times a week, do I do that 5 times a week? Or do I just do it once for the novelty? Because if I was doing 30 squats 5 times a week, I imagine that's reasonably healthy, right? I don't know. Come on, you're missing the big one. Who is it excluding?
or the people with disabilities or the people who are sick or, I mean, temporary disabilities or anything.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're in a wheelchair, if you're on crutches, you know, if your fitness level doesn't let you do 30, if you're not dressed appropriately, you know, if you don't feel comfortable doing squats in front of people, you know, yeah, it is exclusive rather than inclusive. So
Yeah.
that's a consideration that we need to keep in mind. All right, let's do a different one. This one.
Oops.
All right, so we kind of get the idea there, yeah. So that is a training simulation to try and teach people how to put out the appropriate kind of fires using the appropriate extinguishers. So you saw on the first one, it wasn't having any effect and you were standing too close. Now, the other thing that's really interesting, that is becoming increasingly the domain of augmented or virtual reality. So there's this really interesting crossover between AR, VR, XI, extended reality, games and gamification, and corporate or industrial training. I've got to be honest, I watched that and I thought, oh yeah, that'd be quite good fun. I'd give it a shot. I'm not sure it'd help me learn anything, but gee, it'd probably be a lot more effective than that dreadful, you know, let's do an hour and a half PowerPoint presentation at the start of every single year in every single school or university I've ever taught in, where we talk about the fire escape and the exits and who's the fire marshal and what we do. So, you know, maybe it would be effective. And it's certainly not unfamiliar to anyone who's played any kind of first-person shooter game. The last example I want to give you, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about how these all work and how they actually link to theory, is probably one of the most notable examples of games and gamification. Whether it's got anything to do with learning, I'm skeptical. But yeah, let's talk about Pokemon Go.
Here to guide you through everything you need to know to start your Pokemon Go adventure, Ash Ketchum style. So give your mama a sweet kiss goodbye, pack your Pokeballs, and let's go. This free app for iOS and Android uses your location via GPS to make you literally become a Pokemon trainer. It'll insert your slightly customizable character. I mean, you can choose hair, skin, and eye color, and then your outfit into the map, and Pokemon, Pokestops, and gyms will all show up. Your goal goal is to catch all the Pokemon, collect items from the Pokestops, and then take over as many gyms as you can. This is a beginner's guide for those completely new or just getting started with the game. The first thing you'll need, and I do not say this lightly, get a battery pack for your phone. This app uses GPS, which it needs to run open to be effective. You use charge. It was super effective. Alternatively, go into the settings, which is the top right when you click the Pokeball icon, and activate battery save mode. The app has to constantly be open, potentially higher level Pokemon.
All right, you get the idea. I mean, we've all heard of Pokemon.
Take note of your aim.
I kind of hope we've all heard of Pokemon Go. Yeah. Oh, Kashmir, great question. And Sam saying, I think the student would learn a lot faster if you lock them in a room with a real fire, or not. They might not learn at all. But yes, one of the things that they talk about in terms of VR, and I'm kind of wandering off the track a little bit here, is the level of fidelity. And in VR, they've encouraged. They're saying we need to stop talking about it as an experience, as an artificial experience, because people see it as a real experience. So if you simulate an earthquake in a VR setting, people have the same physiological reactions as if it is a real earthquake. And in which case you kind of say, well, you know, let's treat it like a real earthquake, which is pretty full on, right? Anyway, privacy is a genuine issue. I mean, what is the learning involved in Pokemon Go? I've seen teachers trying to use it to teach students geography, map directions, scale for maths teachers. But I've got to be honest, I've never been hugely convinced about its validity as an educational tool. And so we're coming back to this central question about what is the educational value involved in gamification. And I guess the question that I want to share with you is gamification is a pedagogical tool that you can use, but it won't be appropriate everywhere. And it goes back to what somebody said earlier. You know, some people have just thrown in the Kahoot quiz, for example, that had no relevance whatsoever, or even a Kahoot quiz on the same topic, but with poorly designed questions and responses can actually have a worse effect on learning than no Kahoot quiz at all. So I'll tell you how gamification is linked to theory in just a little bit. But there's a couple of things that I want to be clear about what it's not. If you have in your classroom, and I'm speaking, mostly for primary, secondary teachers, if you have this kind of leaderboard system where people get stars, or you use something like Class Dojo, if you've heard of Class Dojo, which is a tool for tracking students' behavior, that's not gamification. Just because it's got badges, points, and rewards does not necessarily make it gamification. I mean, that's part of it, sure, okay? It might motivate action. It might have some mechanics in there. It might even increase engagement, at least for a little while. But it doesn't have all of those kinds of things. Therefore, it's not gamified learning. It's also not about trivializing learning. And this is something that low-level attempts at gamification get wrong. And it's one of the reasons that I think Kahoot, for example, if you don't know what Kahoot is, it's just like a simple quiz kind of tool. Kahoot is okay, but it does make things far too simplistic. And I think Duolingo does this as well, to be honest. If you can reduce everything down to a yes or no, true or false answer, that's really simplistic. And there's a time and place for it. But really, by the time you're talking about, lower secondary, upper secondary, it has limited utility in the classroom. It's not stress-free. And it's not easy, okay? If we take computer games, things like Mass Effect, you've got teams of hundreds working on them for 2, 3, 4, 5 years at a time. Now, obviously, no teacher has got the resources to do anything like that. So don't think that creating a gamification is going to save you time or effort or stress. It won't. Okay. I spoke to a teacher, a colleague of mine, who made this most incredible Harry Potter simulation. So she assigned all the students in her class to a house, and she decorated her whole classroom, and it was all based around this idea of the house trophy at the end of the year. It was incredible. But she was a wreck by the end of it because she was exhausted. It's not perfect for every situation, And it's also not new. This is really, really important. Teachers and other educators and trainers have been gamifying things for a very, very long time. So yeah, don't think that it has to rely on educational technology. Educational technology in some ways makes it easier, but it's certainly not the only answer. And it certainly doesn't require educational technology either. All right, so what do you need to have in your classroom to make it work? Now, remember, there's a bit of an element of synchronicity and serendipity, that the sum of these is greater than the sum of the individual parts. So these are the kinds of things that I think you need to look out for. I'm just going to highlight a couple of those that I think are really important. The first one is levels. Good computer games especially do this really well. They insert you into the action straight away, so you don't have to sit through an hour and a half of training to learn how to play a computer game. But they structure it, they scaffold it in such a way that you can learn along the way. And good approaches to gamified learning do the same thing, okay? If the rules take more than about 15 minutes to explain at the start, you're probably going to be doing it wrong, okay? You've got to be immediate feedback, okay? Immediate feedback and a replay. So you die, you get to try again right away. You die, you lose, you don't win, that kind of thing, right? The best examples of gamified learning have a story. I used to work with a guy called Gary Bates. I probably shouldn't tell you his name. Anyway, he was a teacher in the UK, and he was into live action role playing. So he had a whole alter ego where he got dressed up on the weekends and hit people with big foam swords. You know, it was great fun. But he was also one of these incredibly gifted storytellers. And he would take his classes on these wonderful story journeys. You know, so he was teaching junior secondary kids history and geography, and everything had a story. And the emotional value that came with that meant that the students learnt more, because they, you know, going back to what we said, there was context, there was reality, there was a link to what they were learning about. Conflict, competition, or cooperation. Yeah. All right. So all those kinds of things that we've talked about. There is some links between gamification. We know gamification works in some respects and doesn't work in others. But people have tried to find ways that it links to existing models of learning. So Keller talks about the ARCS model of motivation, which is one way of understanding how people are motivated to learn. And those elements of storytelling and aesthetics and being able to try again and conflict and competition fit nicely with that. Operant conditioning and behaviorism is very clearly part of gamification. You know, you do well, you get a reward. You do badly, you know, you don't get the reward, that kind of stuff, okay? Distributed practice and cognitivism. So if we take Duolingo as a good example, there's these gaps that you go back to. And the way Duolingo is structured is that if you don't practice one particular skill for a while, it starts to decay and you've got to go back and do it. So that's kind of related to that cognitive idea of spaced repetition or distributed practice that people have talked about. And of course, you know, you can't go past this notion of scaffolding within a game, you know, learning to play the game, easy to easy to learn, hard to master, that kind of element, which is very close to Vygotskian ideas of scaffolding and constructivism and social constructivism. So there are quite strong links between some of the educational theories that you've probably heard about and games and games-based learning and gamification. I can see people talking about drama in the background. Yes, absolutely. None of this will be particularly revolutionary to teachers in the performing arts. Yeah, okay, cool. A word of caution, it is time consuming, okay? And it is time consuming, and sometimes it can lead to very little payoff, okay? You know, I've tried gamification and you know, you spend hours planning it and coming up with these wonderful rules and you're like, this is absolutely gonna work. And then it doesn't. And you're like, oh, why did I waste all that time? It can be incredibly costly. If you're going to spend a bit of time investing in software to make your gamification platform work, that's probably going to come with a cost attached to it. Even if you're going to do it all by hand and you're going to buy the cardboard and the glitter paint and all that kind of stuff, that's still going to come with the cost. Ideally, your schools will provide you with some funds for that, but I know so many teachers dip into their own pockets, which, you know, is not ideal, but let's face it, we all do that. And of course, it's not suitable for every situation. That's so important. There are times and places for gamification, and one of the traits of a very good teacher, I think, is being able to determine when and where to use it. How do you determine that? Well, you know, you get better with practice, right? That's a good one, Matthew. I like it. All right. What do I use for gamification? When I do use gamification, I use tools like h5p.com. I like Genially. Genially is a lot of fun because it comes with built-in gamification tools. Kahoot, which we've already talked about, and yeah, Mentimeter is not bad. iClicker is lots of fun because it's just a really quick and easy one to do those kinds of things. The other kinds of things that I like to do is use what I would call hard games for examples of gamification. So when I was teaching in the UK, I used to teach in what was called PSHE, which was Personal Social Health Education, a little bit like PDHPE in Australia. Or social and emotional learning. We use The Sims, you know, so that very old game about people living and going to work. We use it with Year 9 and Year 10 students to teach them to think about, you know, the kinds of things that they have to do about, you know, personal hygiene, about getting up early, going to work, the consequences if they don't go to work, all those kinds of things. It was really, really effective. But we didn't just get them to play the game and leave it at that. We structured a whole learning experience around it, of which the game was only one tiny little aspect. So the students wrote really quite detailed blog and journal entries about what they'd learnt and what they'd done and how they were going to do things differently and trying to relate it to their own lives. And it was just perfectly timed because it was at the time that students were getting their own mobile phones, so they needed to have income. They were getting part-time jobs. They were learning to drive, so they need to be thinking about, you know, alcohol and drug use. And of course, there was the other side, the relationship side of things as well. So that was an example of where it was really, really effective and using an off-the-shelf game for that purpose rather than trying to build one of our own. Of course, there are drawbacks. And one of the drawbacks that we've mentioned very briefly is the notion of fatigue. People get bored quickly. And then there's ways of trying to manage that. And we also mentioned, you know, unethical behavior in kinds of games and gamification. And I saw Kashmira put in the chat, she spoke about privacy is another issue. So if you're getting all the students to play Pokemon Go, have you read the terms and conditions? Are they old enough to be using that? You know, and do you have parental permission? All of those kinds of things. Yeah, so all right, that's games and gamification, games-based learning in a nutshell. How about that? I figured I've left some time, maybe about 5 or 6 minutes, for some questions. I thought there might be some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. And because that I have 2 kids and they keep playing games, then I have to like really remove the devices by force, which I don't want, but I do have to do it. I'm just thinking, so for instance, they play Roblox and it's a suite of games. So they have game inside the game, and I have not played it, so I don't know, but they have some games where they have to work, they have to, and then they pay their bills, and to pay their bills they have to go work and things like that. And I'm just thinking, even though that game may not be like intentional, like in terms of educational value, like intending to do something valuable or teach something valuable, how valuable those kind of things are. And in the gamification, I think wherever I saw, so my question is that when I saw teachers using gamifications, they get it wrong due to those reasons that you discussed, like, you know, they have not thought about like the time and the nitty-gritty of like, you know, rules and many other things and ethical. So what is somebody who is beginner in gamification and they want to use little bits and pieces around their classes in primary and secondary, what would be the like beginning thing that they can start with? So how do they start their thinking in gamification?
Yeah, okay. That's a really hard question, Kashmir. I mean, you started off by talking about the incidental learning that occurs along these settings like Roblox. And the other example, and the one that probably is more closely at this time linked to education more formally, is Minecraft. So Minecraft was purchased by Microsoft for the sole purpose of education. They saw the dollar signs, let's be honest about that. And they recognized that they could use it as a platform to encourage more people to ideally learn about things like coding and programming and all that kind of stuff, but also start to think about getting them into the Microsoft ecosystem, which they've probably been quite successful in. So I think there is real potential in using those tools in an appropriate and ethical way. And Dr. Erica Southgate, who is at the University of Newcastle, she's just written a book all about using Minecraft and virtual reality, where she talks about, the challenges of whether they've learnt or not learnt. And overall, she says yes, but there's more to be studied in this setting. Yeah. In terms of getting started with gamification, I think primary school teachers have a real advantage over secondary school teachers in this respect, because they see their students so much more, and they see them for 23, 25 hours a week, so they can construct these, because I think you've got to start off with story. That would always be the first thing that I would say. You need a story to take the students along. Now, the story doesn't have to be the good guy shoots all the bad guys kinds of stories. That's a very simplistic story. It can be the story of a water droplet going from a cloud to rain into a glacier, and the glacier, that's still a story. And there are some wonderful examples of geography teachers doing something like that. But starting from a story and taking a holistic approach to all of the learning, I think it's got to be the starting point, as opposed to what I see most teachers doing, which is saying, I need a 15-minute activity to consolidate these learning objectives. Let's make a Kahoot, or let's do iClicker, or let's do some kind of Socrative exit ticket. Or I found this cool little game where students get to, do something online, and I'm just going to wedge it into my learning program somewhere where it fits, even if it's not particularly at the right level, or it doesn't cover the same kind of content. Exactly. So it's got to be a holistic approach, and to be done properly. But that's the hard bit, That's
why I said it is a learning design issue. And I don't want to take over this, because I'm seeing Fiona has a question. She's asking, is there a program that would recommend to encourage students to start to develop and build their own games in relation to what is happening in the classroom?
Yeah, no, I'd go back to Minecraft for that one, because the reason the game is only part of it. And the technology, the tool, is only part of it. The thing that Minecraft does really, really well is build a social community of educators. So for those who don't know, there's Minecraft and Minecraft Education Edition. And the Minecraft Education Edition is free to everybody. And it also has custom-built kind of scenarios for teaching things. So they normally do something every year with Hour of Code, which is where, let's all teach kids programming for an hour. But they did some incredible stuff around bushfires and machine learning in I think that was a 2020 Hour of Code. And it was just sensational because it was so topical in Australia. And obviously you need to approach it with a little bit of care. And it was all done in Minecraft. So I definitely check out the results. And of course, it's the teacher magpie thing, all right? Don't reinvent the wheel. If someone's gone out there and shared something that they've done, steal it, use it in your own classroom, adapt it, make it work for you. Certainly don't use it just off the shelf, but Yeah,
That's
yeah.
connected, yeah. So next question is from Sheikh, and he is asking how to classify a game that is appropriate for students learning. So I think he is asking about level of difficulty, but why don't you just clarify it, Sheikh? Just turn your mic on and ask. Sheikh, you still there?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yes, obviously talking about a lot of gamification and looking at, how we did have a debate, or you mentioned about how some things are good enough in teaching, as Laura also mentioned about it, that she doesn't really like one of the app that we were talking about earlier.
Duolingo.
So that is what I was thinking. How as a teacher, as a pre-service teacher, we have to look for such activities. Like I'm in a dilemma where, we also have to put technology into our teaching, correct? So how to deviate ourselves, that what is relevant and what is not. If I make sense.
Yeah, that's a big question. Yeah, good one, Sheikh. I think, and I'm going to speak. I'll answer your question from a broad perspective, and then I'll come back to as a pre-service teacher. One of the real problems with education, school education as a whole, is that teachers are not encouraged to try and necessarily sometimes fail. So I think teachers, the greatest skill that teachers develop is that level of professional judgment, that understanding of who's in the room in front of them and what each of those 30 or 25 or 35 students need at that particular time to help them get to the next step and to develop their learning. And that is incredibly complex kind of thing. Teachers make more decisions every 10 minutes than jet fighter pilots. Okay. It's extraordinary, right? And some of these situations are really, really complex. The only way you're going to develop that is by being a mindful practitioner, spending time in the classroom, trying new things, seeing what works and reflecting about whether it does work or doesn't. And I'm conscious that schools aren't always as nurturing of developing that kind of practice as they should be, though, there might be some changes of those in the future. For you, as a pre-service teacher, asking what can I do to make sure that I incorporate technology effectively in my lesson plans in such a way that it works, there's a few real basic things. Don't reinvent the wheel, okay? So start off as small as you can. So if I, as part of my pre-service teaching or my prac teaching, or even my first couple of years of teaching, when I'm seeking accreditation, I would not go down the path of that huge, let's redesign a whole program of study around this one story and gamified kind of thing. I'd certainly start putting together ideas and thinking about it and reflecting about it, how I might do it in the future. But I would start from looking at the kinds of tools and thinking about how I'd want. So start off really small. There's nothing in and of itself wrong with having a kind of a Kahoot at the end of a lesson, as long as it's relevant and fits with the learning objectives. It's not gamification, but it's not necessarily wrong either. Okay, so try those technologies, and that way, when you get down the path a little bit into your career and you feel more confident about how to use technology effectively, you can start putting it all together. It's that's what I'd do to begin with. Yeah. It's a big question, Shay.
We have one more question, probably the last one, if anybody wants to ask anymore. But Michael Clark asking, so my challenge with 3 gamers in my household, teen and preteen, is managing the amount of screen time that they have. I constantly struggle. Is there any research around what an optimum amount of screen time in the classroom or it should be?
Yeah, good question. And I'm going to answer as a teacher, not as a parent. My kids are 6 and 3, so we're not quite at the that point yet, though I get the feeling that's not far away. Anyway, there's good screen time and bad screen time, and rather than coming up with this set rule of 3 hours or 3 hours per day, that seems like a lot, an hour per day or whatever, I'd instead focus on good screen time versus bad screen time. Good screen time is when there is a clear defined, for learning, there is a clear defined purpose of what you're doing. Bad screen time is aimless doom scrolling. You know what I mean? When you're just scrolling and clicking on things. We want to maximize good screen time and avoid bad screen time. Examples of bad screen time, and I see this a lot amongst early career teachers, is when they say, oh, we're doing a project on the causes of the First World War. Quick, let's all get on our computers and research the causes of the First World War. Oh my goodness, they'll be there forever, okay? And most of what they find will not be relevant or comprehensible for students, okay? A much better use of good screen time would be to put together a very clear pathway or a list of resources that are age appropriate and things like that. And then don't just say, let's go and find the causes of the First World War. It might be, go to this website and find 3 things that this person says led to the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand or whatever. Okay, forget about the examples that I'm giving you there, but I'm just trying to say that they need to be really, really directed. The other thing related to that is that I think not all online learning needs to be online. It sounds really stupid when I say it out loud. But what I mean is take every opportunity to get the students away from the computer screens, okay? So they might come back and present something, but they can go and do something else, So go out into the backyard and find this, or do that, or go and draw a picture and then come back and show it. They don't have to do all of the learning on the computer, okay? So yeah, I think, yeah, being very direct about what we're trying to achieve is really important. I like it, Sam. Nice. And obviously it worked because they both made it to university. So well done.
Well, not just university. I warn you, though, I ended up with 2 very nerdy kids. They're both doing advanced science courses.
Oh, there you go.
So not necessarily a good thing either.
Excellent. And I saw someone asking about copy of the slides. Absolutely. I'll send them off to Kashmir and she can share them out to you. And I'll put my my email address if you want to ask me any questions.
I'll send them all.
Oh.
Yeah. So the people who are attending here who are not from Charles Darwin University, I will separately post you the, let me just, okay, so thank you, Keith. I'm just stopping the recording. So